안녕하십니까. 10년차 영어 강사 아그네스입니다. 오늘 보실 데모 렉처는 두 파트로 나뉘며 각각의 엑스트랙트는 문학 장르 중 최근 국제학교와 보딩스쿨의 트렌드에 걸맞게 포에트리와 그래픽 노벨로 이루어졌습니다. 아울러 시간 관계상 시범 강의는 지문의 일정 부분으로만 간략히 진행하겠습니다. Alright, let us begin with the analysis of an IB English exam. Here we have two options in a Paper 1 format. The assessment requires students' ability to analyze and interpret literary texts. The first and foremost step in tackling Paper 1 would be to look at the guiding question available at the end of a text. Let us read the following question together. How does the poet convey the central theme of the poem? Despite the brevity of this one-line sentence, students should feel fortunate that the exam is allowing us to examine the context from a broad scale. There is no specific expectation in terms of a particular aspect of a rhetorical choice or a narrowed topic. We are simply looking at the conveying of a central theme within the poem. After looking at the guiding question, let us consider the elements of a text type. Here we have a poem. Elements could include but not be limited to stanza, structure, rhythm, and tone. I like to guide my students with a tool called TPCast. This acronym represents the following key features in a poetry analysis. T for title, P for paraphrase, C for connotation, A for attitude, S for shift, T for theme, and then we come back to title for a reason. These are some of the ways, right? Not the only way to interpret a poetry, but I think it's a good starting point for students to recognize how to tackle poems better. We look at title, for instance, for a first image or the first impression of the piece. When we think of horses, it could be ideas suggesting of masculinity. It could be the simple hobbies for a student. It could be something that alludes to the nature, etc. So that's our first impression. In terms of paraphrase, this is a free verse. It's not structured by a 4x4 line stanza. We want to make sure in a free verse where we could be able to spot a transitional point, and we'll be able to do that in a second. Connotation, the opposite of denotation, for instance, is the underlying interpreted implied meaning instead of its dictionary meaning. And the list goes on. I do want to point your direction to attitude, where we have three sort of key identifications. Attitude begins with the point of view, where and who is speaking, what context they're in, why they're speaking the way they are. It could also be for the general mood and setting of a piece, and also last but not least, their particular diction choice. So sometimes when we are in the setting, a social setting, for example, with friends, we like to be casual, whereas I'm giving a presentation right now, so I'm trying to be as formal as I can without using much of a colloquial phrase. And then we've got shift and theme and title, but for time's sake, I am going to move over to the actual interpretation of these first few stanzas. By examining the commonalities of diction choices, for instance, let's look at how in the boxed portion, if we were able to spot the mood by circling words that indicate a negative, cynical, or pessimistic tone. So why don't you do that for a second? Everybody grab your pencils, or if we're using your digitalized computers, highlight what you deem as words that contribute to the overall mood of these few lines in the boxed portion. Exactly. So we have words like no light, or phrasings like no light, no heaven, wet bread, vacant, bitten, teeth, winter, mist, for instance. Let's stop right there for a second. Pertaining to the word, for instance, vacant and mist, vacancy, right, kind of helps us understand that somebody is in great solitude or they are detached from a situation. I will write that out. Solitude or detachment. Mist, right? Mist can be symbolic of uncertainty. or the unknown, something that's mysterious, for instance. And we have our understanding of these words because the narrator I, let me highlight I for a second. It's in the first person perspective. We know that's going to be very reflective and full of emotions. This narrator is in a place of discomfort because everything feels hopeless and dejected. One of the most important strategies to dissect a poem like Horses is to look for transition words as well. In this boxed portion, where do we see a key word that refers to a shift in tone? Take a few seconds to spot that. Exactly. A word as simple as suddenly, right? A word as simple as suddenly becomes the transitional turning point for the narrator. We can see that horses themselves appear for the first time since the given title of this piece was Horses, and we are seeing it here. Horses are surging through the mist. This is also helping us understand the way in which these horses are maneuvering in a quite dramatic and vibrant manner. So let's now take a look at a different portion, the last two lines of this portion of the boxed area. I would like for us to consider Neruda. Remember, Neruda is our poet. Neruda's use of repeating consonant words at the beginning of a certain line, for instance. What is this device even called? Let's think about that. That is correct. We like to call this alliteration. Repeat after me. Alliteration. Alliteration. Now that we know that's the device, is anyone able to identify alliteration examples in these last two lines in the red box? Absolutely. Good job. We are noticing fire, flare forward, and don't stop here. Remember, alliteration doesn't mean it has to be exactly next to each other. If we are grouping these two lines together, I would even consider filled the whole world, right? The F sound here is both impactful and extremely aggressive, right? Given that the F sound is both impactful and aggressive, the sudden appearance of horses represent their radiant abilities and rhythmic thunder to catch the eyes of a dejected narrator. We do also have a couple rhetorical devices, not just alliteration, that are meshed here. For instance, let me use a different color. Let's say, for instance, we know that like waves of fire, that is the use of a simile. We also know that the flaring forward to my eyes fill the whole world. What is that called when we say fill the whole world? Something very dramatic and exaggerated. Right, that's called a hyperbole. The hyperbole in my eyes fill the whole world. What is the significance behind these two essential lines? Let's think about that for the next few minutes. 자, 이제 파트 2로 넘어가겠습니다. 샘플 텍스트 중 동일하게 가장 첫 번째 칸을 분석하겠습니다. We will proceed with the same steps as completed in the previous text. Please come to the end of the page and read the guiding question with me again. Show how graphic novel features interplay with text to create meaning. The essential target analysis point here is the interplay. We are not just focusing on text, we are not just focusing on the visuals, but we are trying to see how the written work and the visual elements work together to convey the author's intended message. Now, we're going to look at just this first panel, and clearly there are elements of graphic weight, symbolism, facial expressions, as well as juxtaposition. Let me zoom in a little closely. Focusing just on the juxtaposed elements, consider how the left column, which illustrates mechanic tools, as you see over here, like a ruler, a hammer, some gears, and all these different sizes, they're all floating in the background. What do these tools represent then? What are the symbolic meanings of them in real life? Well, with the ideas of creation and construction, right? As well as all those things interpreting industrialization, and ultimately human progress. Given this, right, we want to be able to say that the supported aspects like precision, skills, as well as the power to change situations, ideas, or even the individual him or herself becomes available. Where do we see that? We're looking at visual elements, right? Where do we see that in the text? In the given text over here, where do we see this being mirrored? Where do we see all of it being reflected so that we can talk about, again, the interplay between text and image to create meaning? Anybody want to volunteer? You're correct. The part where the female character mentions her family being very modern and avant-garde. Essentially, in a body paragraph, you would be required to compare and contrast the given panel's interplay of image and text. So let's say a sentence could, for instance, begin with the following. In the first panel of Satrapi's Persepolis, the juxtaposition between traditional and modern values is evidenced by the complacent display of phrases like ding ding ding, ABC, and the symbolic representations of the XYZ, ding ding ding, as you see in the visuals. 지금까지 두 가지 문학 장르를 시범으로 다룬 강의였습니다. 고맙습니다.